Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining our webinar on drainage approval and adoption in Wales. My name is Ling and I'm the Senior Marketing Executive at Causeway Technologies. So today we're joined by our expert speakers, Mark Goodger, Sean Roberts and Dr. Netsanet. Mark is the Principal Engineer at the lead local flood authority at Caerphilly County Borough Council and he oversees the SAP function. And Sean is a drainage team leader at Granite Consultancy, where he oversees drainage designs from single house to multi-million pound developments, including commercial developments, implementing SuDS and following SAP requirements. And finally, we're joined by Dr. Netsanet. He is the product owner at Causeway Technologies. So today they will be discussing the SuDS legislation, how to overcome common sticking points in the SuDS application process, and how this legislation might impact the rest of the UK. There will be a live Q&A session at the end, so you can enter your questions in the questions pane in your control panel. This webinar is also recorded, so you will have the opportunity to watch this again. And so hopefully by the end of this webinar today, you will feel more confident about preparing quality SuDS application. And now I'm going to hand the time over to you, Nat.
Thank you very much, Ling. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. My name is Nate, as Ling introduced. I will be facilitating the Q&A session later on, so please feel free to raise your questions through the chat box. You can ask as many questions as you like. We aim to get your questions answered by the panelists later on. But let us do the first poll question before Mark's presentation. So the first poll question is, have you submitted a drainage design for approval in Wales since the implementation of Schedule 3 to the Flood and Water Management Act on the 7th of January 2019? It's a yes or no answer. We'll give it about 10 seconds until we have all the answers compiled. And I'll share the answers in a couple of seconds. Okay, let me share the answers. There you go. So thank you for participating in this poll question. It is interesting to notice, obviously, significant percentage have been done so, and obviously about 35% have done. And obviously, for those of you who have done or who have submitted the drainage design for approval in Wales, we're using the latest Schedule 3 implementation. Hopefully you'll find it useful, as both Mark and Sean will be able to share best practices. For those, the significant majority, 65% or more, you will certainly find their experiences and recommendations from the perspective of a sub and the designer very useful and valuable, hopefully. So without further ado, let's look at Mark's presentation. And Mark, you should be able to present your screen and start your talk.
Yep, just bear with me. Okay, there we are. So hopefully everybody can see the screen coming through now. So my name is Mark Goodger, as Matt said. I'm the Principal Engineer at Caerphilly Council, a sustainable drainage approval body in Wales. I'm going to take a quick look at a case study, highlight some of the lessons learned from Schedule 3 in the implementation so far, and then I will just have a quick reflect on whether we think that the process has been a success up until now as well. For those of you who don't know, Caerphilly is a South East Wales Valleys community, South East Wales Valleys Council. So we extend from Brecon Beacons National Park in the north to Cardiff and Newport in the south. We've got 3 river valleys and they run pretty much north to south. In terms of the sustainable drainage approval functions, we also work in partnership with 2 of the neighbouring authorities, so Blaen y Gwent and Torfaen. We administer the technical functions and a lot of the administrative functions of the sustainable drainage approval body on their behalf. There's a couple of different routes to approval. So we offer a discretionary pre-application advice service. That is discretionary, so it's up to the developers and the designers as to whether they think that is something that's going to be a benefit to them. The fees are set by the SAB, so it is a fee-paying service and something that we do charge for. And those fees are there to make sure that we can ring-fence officer time, and officers have dedicated time to spend on that application and give it the attention that it needs. And we can be quite flexible to the needs of the designer. So in the past couple of years, we've seen pretty much everything from people coming in with pretty much a blank piece of paper. And we've had effectively a brainstorming or a sketch ideas session, to people coming through with pretty much a full detailed design, almost ready for full application, and they just want to check everything's there before they actually submit the button on the full application. Full application is a statutory process. It's a 7-week determination period from validation, or 12 weeks if an EIA is required. The fees are set out in the legislation, and it is a detailed technical approval. So we do need full detailed design upfront at the point of submission, because there is only limited scope to apply sort of post-approval conditions. There's also fairly limited scope to change or modify an approval once it's in place as well. So it can be quite restrictive towards the end of the process. Definitely better to try and work upfront and get things prepared early doors. We will sometimes then also enter into legal agreements, particularly if there is a duty to adopt. So legal agreement with the developer to set out the terms of the adoption and future maintenance of the drainage system. So just a quick case study, just fly through one that actually came through quite early on in the implementation. So these photos were March 2019. And this was a site that a developer had gone inside to strip the land, clear the site, level the site off. Started without SAB approval for the development, also started without planning permission, but that's a little bit of a different story and a different presentation for a different day. Development clearly over the 100 square metre threshold at which SAB approval kicks in, and very definitely had drainage implications. This is a previous development of the same style by the same developer. So this was what the developer was pretty much expecting to build on that site. The only drainage infrastructure you can pretty much see on the left-hand photo is very traditional gullies, pipe drainage. And the only vegetation, the only green infrastructure on the site is some weeds that are sprouting through between the parking spaces, which are there probably more by accident than design. We wrote to the developer when we noticed that they were starting the development without the approvals in place, and we informed them of the new legislation and the need to obtain approvals. The original notice that we wrote to the developer gave them 4 weeks within which to make an application for SuDS approval. We didn't formally place a stop notice on the developer at the time, although we did advise the developer that we did have the power to do so, and further construction activity might mean that we would take that step. Fortunately, we didn't have to take that step, because within 2 weeks of receiving the letter, the developer was in our offices with his planning agent and with the drainage designer, and presented their first ideas for what might work on the site. Coincidentally, that was my first day at Caerphilly Council and first day at the authority, so it was quite a baptism of fire for me to step straight into an enforcement case. The design did progress and develop relatively quickly to something towards what we see on the sign, which was the final sort of pre-construction approval. Really, this was the last iteration, but it did go through 4 or 5 iterations of design on site, and there were complications arising from the topography on site. So there was a need to tie in with an existing access road. There's also a river to the south and western boundary of the site. There's also Welsh Water main and a Welsh Water sewer crossing the site as well. So those had easements associated with it, which just made things a little bit more difficult in terms of finalising and getting the design. So this is just a quick reminder of the previous development that was completed just before Schedule 3 came into implementation. And then this is the new development. These photos are pretty much 3 years down the line. The application was actually approved in September 2019, and these photos were taken in June. So it did take the developer about 6 months to get from the point at which we told them that an application would be needed to actually having that application fully approved. So this development couldn't really look much more different from the previous one. The detention basin in the centre of the site is flourishing. You can't see it there, but it does hold a little bit of water by design. The second detention basin, which is on the top right of the screen, has a controlled outfall to the River Bumney that runs past the site. And each of the downpipes are treated by a little pocket rain garden coming off the unit. So that's what you can see kind of on the top left-hand side of the screen as well. The developer has advised that this development is really well received by his tenants who've taken up the units on the site. And in fact, the tenants on the other site, a number of them have expressed an opinion to move down to this site or move to his next development. And they're excited to learn where that's going to be. And it's actually quite a progressive developer now. So for his next development, he's looking at trialing different features. He's looking at learning some of the things that went right and some of the things that weren't quite as smooth as he'd like from this one, and looking to take those lessons into the future developments. So that just brings me on a little bit to what are the lessons learned and what have we seen in terms of the benefits of the developments going forwards. So can't really stress enough, pre-application is key. Definitely early conversations and early discussions can be the best thing that we can do to lead to successful multifunctional sites, SuDS on sites. And like I said earlier, pre-application can be flexible. It doesn't have to be a one-time thing. It can be an iterative process, and it can work as an additional idea scoping session, or really just making sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed the T's before the application comes in. There have been some incidents where we've noticed that there is a little bit of a disconnect with the dual process between SAB and planning permission being separated processes. So Caerphilly Council are shortly going to be kicking off a Welsh Local Government Associated backed trial where we're going to actually be delivering joint planning and SAB pre-application processes to try and make sure that we bring those two processes closer together again and make sure that we're not heading too far down the line with those two processes having competing needs or not dovetailing together to get a good development on site as quickly as we possibly can. Enforcement does work. Enforcement is an important tool in the SAB armory or the SAB toolbox, but again, it needs to be flexible. And we as a SAB need to recognise that what we're actually looking for is good development on the ground. And we need to make sure that the developers have that sufficient time to take action and respond. Like I said earlier, that particular case study, we initially gave them 4 weeks to bring forward an application. That was unrealistic, really, in terms of the time that designers need to get to grips with the design. So we had to be a little bit flexible, and we had to work with them through that iterative process to get a design and get development moving again on site. We don't see it quite as often now. We do still see applications coming through going, oh, some of those standards in the Welsh Government Standards document don't apply to me. So it is worth remembering that there's 6 standards in the Welsh Government Standards document. All 6 standards do apply to all developments of all types and all scales where SAB approval is needed. But there is a proportionality. So there is an element of flexibility within the standards as to how far we go with water quality, how far we go with amenity and biodiversity, how far we go with flood risk management and greenfield rates as opposed to perhaps betterment approaches. So there is that little bit of flexibility, but certainly all 6 standards are mandatory and they do apply. Full applications are detailed technical approvals, so we do need detailed approval, detailed information at the submission time, as I've mentioned. There are a couple of checklists in the application form, tables A and table B. And again, when people are going through making full applications, if it is going to be your first one or you haven't done many, use those as checklists, think about the information that's requested there. And if you're not supplying it, then provide some kind of narrative or some kind of explanation as to why that information isn't necessary or relevant for that kind of application. A quick touch on calculations. When you are submitting, don't just think about the critical storm for storage. Also think about annual, potentially even sub-annual storms, and providing that information with your submission package, particularly if that's the morphology events that we're looking at or water quality events that we're looking at. Also think about exceedance events and make sure that that information is coming through to the SAB as well, so that we know what happens when we do get either an exceedance or a failure event as well. So the general message probably is we'd rather have too much information than not enough. If you're not sure, then it goes back up to point 1 and it goes to pre-application, and if in doubt, ask. There is a continuing need for sessions like this, no doubt about that. There are still people coming through who are going through the process for the first time, particularly some of the small independent developers and planning agents or the self-build applicants. So it is a continual learning process. And as a SAB as well, you know, we're still learning, we're still reflecting on what we're doing in the process, whether there's iterative improvements that we can make to make the process a little bit more self-sustaining from our point of view, but also more sort of customer friendly and more forward facing in terms of delivering the outcomes that we want. But there is no getting away from the fact that it is a front-end loaded process. There is a lot of technical information needed to support it, and there's limited scope to apply conditions or make amendments after approval. And the final lesson we'll probably learn from this is that 7 weeks really isn't a long time, particularly if there is confirmation of information, additional information requests, clarifications that are needed. That time can pretty much disappear in a heartbeat. We've also got statutory consultations to go through, and 21 days of that 7 weeks, so 3 weeks of that 7 weeks is the statutory consultation period. So again, there's limited scope once we come out of that to obviously take into account the feedback from the consultees, and again have a dialogue with the applicants and the engineers and agents if we need to. But it does come fully back round to the more we can do of that upfront and the more we can do of that through the pre-application process, the better it is all round. Just a couple of slides just to finish off for me in terms of the feeling in the industry, really, in terms of is Schedule 3 a success? One of our senior assistant engineers at Caerphilly Council, Max Navy, has just completed his degree, and he's just done his final year dissertation, just had his marks back and got a first in his degree, which is excellent. But his final year project was very much focused on post-implementation of Schedule 3. What does that look like? And he went out with a survey to developers, SABs, engineers, contractors, mainly focused around the sort of small residential developments, so around about sort of 10, 15 properties development. One of the questions that he asked in his survey is, does Schedule 3 delay development? And the result is presented on the slide. So you can see that 60% of the respondents felt that Schedule 3 wasn't delaying development, but 40% of the respondents said that there is an impact in terms of delays to development through the implementation of Schedule 3. So that does indicate to us that there is more work to be done. There are improvements to be made in terms of the process. Some of the key reasons that were cited in the responses to Max's survey as being behind those delays were clients unwilling to commit to detailed technical design whilst planning permission hasn't yet been determined. So they want that safety net of having the permission to build before they get into the detailed design step. Lack of detail or missing information or clarifications needed in the application quite often meant that we entered into an iterative process. So there was that discussion ongoing between SAB and applicant or agent to try and fill that in. And again, that quickly means that the clock runs down and runs out of time. So that does impact on the timing. Issues arising from the consultees. So again, that's coming back to there isn't a lot of time in that process to deal with any issues that come up. So we are back into a position of having to make that decision of whether that's something that can be addressed within the application process or whether that's something where we need to draw a line into the application and start again. And there is some ongoing issues in sustainable drainage approval bodies in Wales with regards to capacity. We saw a bit of a slow start, but we have seen a pretty rapid increase in applications, so it is a constant challenge to keep applications going. We're running at probably about 40 to 50 applications on the go in Caerphilly across those 3 authority areas at any one time. So we are just constantly busy with reviewing applications and then obviously progressing through and moving through the next one. But we do obviously want to make sure that we give all of those applications the attention to detail and the time that they need. In terms of is Schedule 3 working? So Max broke down his questions into individual standards and individual topic areas. So you did ask the question of, is Schedule 3 working for improvements to flood risk management? And gratifyingly, 75% of, or 73% of respondents felt that Schedule 3 is working, is delivering improvements to flood risk management. In terms of water quality, the response was actually even better. So we've got 76% of respondents were feeling that Schedule 3 is delivering improvements and is delivering better management of water quality and better mitigation of water quality. For immunity and biodiversity, the response wasn't quite as favourable, so we were down to about 69% of respondents feeling that that was having improvements. And again, there was a couple of them indicating that potentially there is quite a bit more that could be done to improve the way that we deal with immunity and biodiversity through Schedule 3 and through the SuDS standards. Overall, so Max's final question in terms of his dissertation was for applicants, respondents to rate the success of Schedule 3 since implementation on a scale of 0 to 10. There were a couple of dissenting voices around the sort of 1 to 2 rating, but quite positively in terms of going forwards. Most of the respondents scored positively, scored above 5, and over half of the respondents were scoring 7 out of 10 or higher in terms of the success of Schedule 3. So I think we can say that Schedule 3 has been a success. It's not necessarily a perfect beast. There are improvements and iterations that can be made to deliver on better outcomes, but we are making progress and we are heading in the right direction. So final slide from me, and it is just a bit of a flash of what is coming, what's on the horizon. This information gratefully provided by Welsh Government. Welsh Government have formally commenced a review of the guidance and the legislation post-implementation. This was supposed to happen a little while ago, but it was delayed by COVID and then various elections. So that review is underway. Welsh Government are aiming to get a questionnaire out to stakeholders in the autumn of 2022 and stakeholder workshops in January and February of next year, with the report and recommendations due to be published around sort of spring, early summer 2023. If anyone's interested in finding out more about that process or wants to express an interest in contributing, then if you send an email through to the email address on screen, that water@gov.wales email address, give permission for your emails to be, or your contact details to be passed on to ARUP, who are administering the review on behalf of Welsh Government, and that'd be your opportunity, obviously, to feed into the review and the legislative review. For my part, that gives me about 10 seconds to spare, so I will end the presentation at that point, and I'll be online for the Q&A session in a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mark. It has been a very informative and interesting presentation, and I am sure you answered quite a significant amount of questions in everyone's side, but I'm also certain you'll have a lot of questions. So everyone who's attending, feel free to raise any questions you might have based on what Mark presented. Before we move on to Sean's presentation, let's do the second poll question, and let me launch that. So the second question is, do you get involved in projects that require sustainable drainage system design? Yes, regularly. Yes, sometimes. Not yet. I'll give you a couple of seconds before I share the results. Yeah, answers are still coming in. I will close it in a couple of seconds. Fantastic. Yep, it looks like everything has been done. So I'll close and share. Yes, regularly is 80%, and sometimes it's 16. Very, very small amount of people obviously not doing sustainable energy designs. I will now pass you on to Sean. Sean, if you do the presentation. I think you have been made a presenter. Don't forget to switch on your mic.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Sean Roberts. I'm Senior Drainage Engineer for YGC. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Yeah, Sean.
Sorry, Sean. Yeah, I just need to present your screen.
If you click in the sharing pane,
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, we can't see it now. Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Sean Roberts. I'm the Senior Drainage Engineer for YGC. I'm mainly here today to talk to you about the drainage design aspect and what it involves with SAB coming into Wales since 2019. The first port of call really I'd like to talk about is the importance of early engagement with the clients and developers or architects pre-design, because what we have found out over the past few years is since SAB has got involved, become mandatory, it's had quite a drastic effect on the drainage implications and how the site is developed to make sure there's enough room for SuDS features, etc. Reason for early engagement mainly is to avoid any unforeseen site issues when it comes to drainage, and it also mitigates the risk of changes to the development later on in the development because of a drainage issue with regards to, say, a lack of space for attenuation and a lack of green areas for SAB approval. So site layout proposal might need to be revised to ensure SAB approval. So we need to be aware of that. So what we do at this stage as designers, we will firstly evaluate and review the site information and just take a look at what the initial proposal will be. We can advise then, based on just a quick look on the drawings, that there may be enough room or if there's scope to change something if needed to make sure that SuDS features can be incorporated in there. And then we would get percolation tests carried out. This will determine the method of discharge. Even though sometimes we get clients coming in saying, I know there's no drainage, there's no percolation in the ground, we want to connect to the main sewer. We just can't do that. We have to prove to SAB that percolation tests have been carried out, and we have to have strong evidence showing why we don't look to discharge into the ground in the first place following the SuDS hierarchy. So for those of you unaware that the SuDS hierarchy really is that we look to reuse the water as best possible, and then we then look, if there is percolation in the ground, to discharge via infiltration to the ground. If we can't do that, then we'd look at discharging to a nearby water body. We'd review the site and see how far there is. Sometimes we're lucky there's water courses running along the side or within the boundaries, or so we can look to discharge there if it's viable. And then we'd look, if that's unachievable, we'd look at discharging into surface water or a highway sewer. Then we'd have to look at getting involved with the statutory bodies like Welsh Water or whoever's in your area at the time to get that approved. This is where we'd look to look at limiting flows and attenuate much more strict. And however, the very last port of call, if we can't get into any one of them, is into a combined sewer. and at the moment getting very difficult to get approval to get the surface water into any combined sewer, just purely on the basis that the utility providers don't want any additional surface water in there. Then obviously we need to discuss with the developer or the architect or whoever was involved with the implementation of SuDS features to the proposed development, explain what we look to do and why, and the reasons why we would put these features in where they are, where we're looking to put them. We usually explain to them how the SuDS features has an effect on the proposed site layout. Allocating SuDS within green open spaces is all well and good. However, if it's not big enough, I've had instances where there was a development where they did have a green space. However, when it came to attenuation requirements, it wasn't big enough. Therefore, we had to go back to the developer, and they had to reevaluate. This one in particular had potential to lose a house to make room for the SuDS features, which wasn't ideal for the developer because it might have been his profit margin in the last house. We got through it anyway, and it was all approved. And then we usually discuss the outline drainage proposals with all parties. We try and prepare a drainage strategy report if one is required, and this will give an overall outline for you to which can be used for the SAB and also the statutory bodies. We can present it as part of the pre-app package, so there is an outline there for people to understand what is going to be done, which I find whenever I do a drainage strategy report to coincide with an outline design, I find that the SAB authorities and the water statutory bodies tend to favour them in the first instance, rather than having to go back and ask more questions, which takes time. And it's definitely advantageous to have a drainage strategy report. So as Mark said, with the pre-app, the early engagement with the SAB authority, from their point of view, there are benefits to getting in early with them and making sure that they're aware of your intentions. You can evaluate the site SuDS proposal for approval, and you can evaluate what they would consider acceptable features that would work best for the site. Obviously, the percolation test result dictates the method of the discharge. SAB will give their approval on this if you've got the necessary evidence, and then also they can look at the site location topography. This will dictate how and where we use the SuDS features and discharge points. They will be able to tell you then, yes, we agree with what you're looking to do. And obviously, going back to the hierarchy, we can explain to them that how we are following the SuDS hierarchy, and show them through evidence via drainage strategy report or an outline plan what we intend to do. The pre-app also gives designers clear indication if SAB will approve it, the full SuDS design or not, or if we have to re-look at what we have done and see if we can change a few things to get it approved. The benefits of doing a pre-app includes cost. Obviously, there's when you do a full applications, there are larger costs, and but clients will also save on full design fees. We usually do like outline designs, just sufficient to show if a proposal will be approved. This in turn does save time in the long term. There have been issues with SAB authority where someone's done a full design and it's just a back and forth, and like Mark said, with the 7 weeks, you've kind of lost that initial 7 week period with if you're going straight into into the full design and full application, you get to the 7th week and you hear that, well, actually, no, we're not going to approve this. Whereas if you do a pre-app, you will get to, you'll get an indication of how it's going to go. So considerations when we're designing, firstly, we tend to try and look after the client when it comes to build costs. There are many SuDS features now that can be extremely expensive to construct, which SAB wasn't put in place for this sort of thing to make it more expensive. It's not about that. It's more what we tend to do is look at the features that would work on site that will be sufficient to pass the SAB requirements. However, won't break the bank when it comes to construction costs. We like to do this because we tend to find that we get repeat customers coming back to us because of our approach to getting the approval without going and putting SuDS features that are just there for show more than anything. Then the ease of maintenance is crucial, considering that some of these features can be quite large, and depending on if they're being adopted or not, we still need to consider the ease of maintenance of them. If you've got a small little swale in a garden, then it's quite easy to mow the lawn over it with a strimmer or whatever. So it makes it easier for, say, a private individual with a house to want to maintain it when it comes to storage capabilities. That's vital. And then obviously I mentioned the SAB hierarchy. We need to consider, does the actual design follow the SuDS hierarchy? Otherwise, by the time you put your application in, it's just going to be knocked back, and questions will be asked. One key thing that I have noticed with SAB is, where possible when we're designing, we need to try and keep the SuDS features in private areas. This would avoid any adoption measures or fees when it comes to the SuDS features. We tend to find in large scale developments that you haven't got a choice, that there will be measures in place. But on single house developments, or say two or three houses, if you can keep the individual SuDS features private within the private gardens, then the responsibility will be on the unit holder, the owner of the house, or whatever it will be, rather than having the developer having to pay for full adoption and maintenance fees for up to 100 years, which can get very expensive even on small developments. There was one example where there was a 4-house development. There was a SuDS feature, only a ditch, and it meant that with the SAB adoption fees and the maintenance to cover the cost for up to 100 years, the developer was required to pay £30,000 in fees, which is a lot for small private developers. So we need to keep that in mind. Also, we need to discuss, this is going back to in the very early stages, planning stages, if the highway access road or highway that's on site is going to be adopted by the highway authority via the Section 38 agreement. What tends to happen now, if you have a highway that is impermeable, then obviously the gullies, we capture the water runoff from the highway and into the system. Now, usually there will be a SuDS feature to take this in the public space, which will need to be adopted. However, if the highway is up to adoptable standard, the highway authority can adopt the pipe network below the highway because it's taking the water from the highway. So you will have houses connecting into it. However, if the highway is connected into it as well, SAB wouldn't necessarily need to adopt all of the pipe network leading up to the SuDS features. So it would only be the SuDS features that's been adopted by SAB, which I found quite interesting, because it means a lot of people now try to do the Section 38 agreement just purely because of that. Discharge point, obviously we need to look at this, and we need to review if, say, that we need to go into a water body or a sewer, especially combined sewer, that we need to look at getting approval, i.e. from NW or EA or whoever, to discharge into the water body. And if you're going into a sewer, then we'll need, permission from the Welsh Water or whoever your statutory provider is.
Hi, Sean. Just wanted to let you know we've got 5 more minutes.
Okay. Risk of blockages can be an issue. So flow control method needs to be discussed. We need to look at, do we use a hydro brake, which obviously is a lot more expensive than orifice plates. However, the risk of blockage is less. So we need to have that discussion with the client. And then overall design in relation to the whole project. Are the SuDS features suitable? Soakaways especially. There was one particular instance where I saw an application that came in where there was a permeable highway, and there was a soakaway below it with no membrane in between. And if you think about if thinking about and reviewing it in a couple of years' time, the water, all the road construction could potentially seep into the soakaway, blocking the soakaway or making less room in the soakaway, and then you'd have engineering. You'd have issues with the road, pits, and it would probably need to look at being renewed at some stage. So we need to look at how we and where we put these features and what type of material that we use and how we use them. If it's, sometimes it goes against what I said earlier, try to save on build cost. But however, if it's going below a highway and there's a soakaway, it might be better to use a crate system that is more expensive than just a rock-filled soakaway. Stuff like that we need to look at. Other considerations is spoke about having the private SuDS features, like swales and stuff that are very easy to maintain. Water butts are others that these are for reuse purposes, so we can use them as a tick in the box for the SAB application in reuse. This is what's called at-source SuDS features. With SuDS, it does get quite difficult sometimes to implement the amenity and biodiversity. Large schemes like this one I'm showing here, you've got a large holding pond with a high hydro brake limiting out to an existing watercourse. Amenity and biodiversity was no issue here because benches would be located around like the path, and biodiversity would come naturally with providing a habitable area for birds and fish and whatever that would be there. And then obviously we need to look at scope to reuse the water. That's going back to water butts and stuff on agricultural developments. Can we reuse the water from the roof spaces to feed to give the drinking water to the animals? So that's another feature that we can do. Have a holding tank or something like that before it actually discharges it via high level overflow into a network. Permeable surfaces, we try and put them in if there is, if we can have some sort of percolation. These are usually in driveways, something like that. We tend to specify them. It limits the amount of water going into a network, which always helps. And obviously, when we are looking to discharge, we consider if it's being discharged at a greenfield runoff rate or a brownfield runoff rate, depending if it's an existing developed site or not. And then we design, if we design to a greenfield, say that it's 1 to 2 litres a second, then the flow control has to be either the same or showing a betterment on the greenfield runoff rate. I've spoken about highway design. And then obviously in larger developments, what we look to do as well is we tend to have natural SuDS features within the network to slow the water down, to reduce the runoff even further. As you can see on this one, on this here, there are large ditches within the network itself to be able to slow the water down before it gets into the main attenuation pond. And then this one's quite interesting, because when I said about reusing water as much as possible, this is an example where the agricultural building, these 2 extensions here, were proposed with a very simple SuDS design of surface network design, flow control out to an existing river with a holding pond. Very simple design. However, SAB wanted the designer to show reuse of the water. This became quite an issue because there was no way of splitting the old roof space from the new roof space, and the old roof space contained asbestos, which, if you were using it within the reuse for drinking water for livestock, it could be a potential contamination when it comes to the food chain, etc. So for this one, the SAB was approved on the basis that reuse was not possible here. Yeah, so I think I'm done with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's been really valuable from the perspective of a designer. What you have to think about, what you have to consider, has been pretty much thoroughly covered by you, so I appreciate that. Before we go to the question and answer session, let's do one more poll question, and then we'll go straight into the question and answer session. Thank you very much for all of you who have been asking a lot of questions, so please keep it coming. So the third poll question is, how frequently do you design sustainable drainage systems? A few times a week, a few times a month, a few times a year. I don't design drainage network. So that'll tell us exactly what type of audience we have. And I would imagine some of you will probably be approving bodies, so you'll probably answer I don't design drainage networks, but I would imagine quite a lot of you will probably do. And I'm gonna give it a couple of seconds and I will close the poll and share. Yep, that's perfect. Let me share the answers, and there you go. Quite a significant number of people definitely do design very frequently, or at least from time to time. And about 20% obviously don't do drainage design. I would imagine that would be people who are in the approving bodies side. So let me finish the third poll and let's go straight into the question and answer session. We have been getting quite a lot of questions, so keep it coming. So let's look at the first question that has been raised. This has been actually asked specifically to Sean. How do you deal with the situation that a perfectly feasible design is changed by the approval body because of personal preferences? I would imagine that would be easy to answer.
We'd ask them for reasons why they would why they'd want to change it, and they'd need to give us good indication why, what the proposal, how the proposal doesn't meet their criteria.
Yeah,
we could this is where we could, you know, speak to them and discuss with them, you know, okay, I understand your where you're coming from. However, you need to give me good reasons why we can't use what we're proposing.
Yeah, I can understand that. This, I suppose, is something for Mark to answer. How detailed does the funding value needs to be for the maintenance schedule?
Probably depends on the type of application, the type and the nature of the application, to be honest. Again, we can apply a little bit of proportionality. So if it's a non-adoptable scheme, what we're really looking for is that understanding that somebody's had that forward vision. Somebody is planning for maintenance, like Sean says, you know, they're designing access routes, they're designing suitable for maintainability, so that somebody can get to the site and maintain it. And again, if it's a single householder development, then potentially there are things that the householder can do themselves, or that can be done relatively simply and straightforwardly. There might be other instances where they might need to get a specialist in, so they might need to get hiring somebody who can do camera surveys or jet in or rod in which case that's going to come at a cost. Similarly, if it's a commercial industrial unit, it's that understanding that they're forward planning budgets so that they don't hit a big cost 5, 10, 15 years down the line and not have the funds there available in their budgets to pay for it. If it's adopted, we will be looking for that, but in terms of adoptable schemes, what we're really looking for at the front end is a common understanding of our starting point, because we will be reassessing that against local authority costs, you know, what it would cost us to maintain. In any case, we're looking for that common ground to start from, so that we've got an understanding of what's in the designer's head when they're building the design for maintenance.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So this is for both of you, if you can. How much does a sub-application cost for companies to design and complete the application in terms of cost associated, I suppose, through the entire process for application? Is there some figure you can put into it?
It all depends on the size of the development. It changes. So I think there's a base fee of £350, and then it's every 0.1 of a hectare. I think it's an additional £70, or 0.1 to 0.5, and then after 0.5 it's £50, and then it gets cheaper as the larger the development goes on. So it's all relative. Every site is different.
Yeah, in terms of your statutory fees, your starting price would be £420 for an application, because you'd have the £350 application fee plus your first increment of area. I think is capped at £7,000. We've never seen one anywhere near that big. And in terms of the full cost to developers, that would be something that I think Sean or others would have to advise on a site-by-site basis in terms of what the design fees and involvement would actually be.
Yeah. This is the issue now. Again, going back to looking at early engagement with the client, is making them aware of the costs. You know, we can when it comes to design, we can advise them on costs like that, but obviously people are just used to paying building control fees, planning application fees, but this is new, and this is sometimes they're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that, and then it can be, you know, if it's another £500-600, it's still a lot of money to when you're not expecting it, you know.
Yeah,
I think the common theme. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Just similarly, there are inspection fees as well. So we will inspect during the construction process, and those are statutory fees as well. So it's £168 per inspection visit. But what we'll always try to do is build an inspection schedule around what's the most that we can see in one visit. So the more information about how and when the system is being built, the more informed we can be when we're building those inspection schedules.
Yeah, and I can obviously see both you and Sean have been advocating for early engagement, and I definitely do the same as well. So earlier you have the conversation, that better it is going to be no surprises at the end. So another question, does the sub adopt all surface water drainage system up to the point of outfall? That's going to be interesting to see what your answers are going to be. So both of you can answer that, I think. Yeah. So go on.
So
yeah. Oh, sorry, sure.
Yeah, sorry. So from what I understand, that any drainage within the private areas won't be adopted by SAB unless it's shared. So therefore, it's kind of similar to what your utility provider, the Welsh Water, for example, would have. Once it passes the boundary, then it would be adoptable. However, like I said in my presentation, if you've got a highway, you could potentially get the highway authority to adopt from the point of the crossing the private to the public section, and then getting SAB just to adopt the SuDS features. People are getting more and more clued on with that because it's far cheaper for them to do it because of the maintenance costs and the adoption fees that you have with, sometimes some structures have 75-year lifespan on them, say, plastic manhole or something like that, 75-year. Then if SAB is adopting it, they will have to take into consideration, if they're adopting it for 100 years, then there's costs to replace that structure. The developer would have to pay that, so there would be that involved as well, which is why when we're doing these designs, we look at, can we keep these features private, and can we keep as much of the system away from SAB adoption as possible. I think it benefits SAB as well because they don't have to go through all the adoption if it's not required. So yeah, sorry, that's.
Yeah, thanks, John. What about you, Mark? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think Sean's covered most of it pretty well, to be fair. So yeah, the duty to adopt kicks in when the drainage system is serving 2 or more properties or serving an adoptable road, and then you do get into the complexities of the SAB adopting or the highways authority adopting. For Caerphilly, it makes life a little bit simpler. The SAB actually sits part and parcel with highway services, so we actually maintain drainage features and highways as part of the service sector. But yeah, so we from the point at which 2 or more properties comes together to the outfall, the duty to adopt would apply. So we'd be looking to adopt those in those circumstances. There are a couple of instances where it then makes sense to voluntarily adopt. So the SAB can voluntarily adopt systems. So I've seen a couple of housing developments, for example, where the duty to adopt is triggered for 19 of the 20 houses. It then doesn't make sense for the 20th property not to also be adopted, because if we went in as a local authority and maintained everybody's property apart from the owner on the end, we'd be faced with questions of, well, why are you doing everyone else's and not ours? So there are sort of variances there that we can look at on a site-specific basis. And again, if there's no reason for us to be adopting, if the facilities can remain private, then again that fits in with a lot of what the SuDS is trying to do around source control and dealing with water as close to where it falls as possible. So again, and plenty of systems there that can be property level based and relatively simple and straightforward to keep operating for a long time.
Thank you, Mark. And just before we wrap up, one final question. I know many of you have raised a lot of questions. We'll try to answer them privately afterwards. The last question is based on your experiences as a SuDS Approving Body and as a designer in Wales for Sean. Since you obviously have implemented Schedule 3 in Wales compared to the rest of the UK, you are in a unique position to be able to advise us or give us lesson on basically what you learned so far and whether what you learned so far is going to be valuable for for England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So if you kind of like give us like a couple of bullet points, and we'll wrap up and we'll try to answer the remaining questions privately. I suppose, Mark, if you have any lessons to be shared.
Yeah, I think the main one is going to be back to what Sean and I have both said already. That early engagement, pre-application is key. Yeah, having those conversations nice and early on does definitely help to smooth the process, gain understanding on both sides of what we're looking to achieve. Is the Schedule 3 perfect? I wouldn't say it's perfect in every way. It is definitely delivering changes in the way that the build environment is coming together. So it's definitely a step in the right direction, but there are things that we can do to improve upon it. So there are lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, thank you. Sean?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not perfect because it does. We do face some difficulties with it when it comes to design. However, on a whole, it does make new developments much better spaces. Forcing a lot of developers want to maximize the profit on the development site, which is obviously fair enough. However, there are instances where there would be no spaces, amenity spaces or anything, which obviously makes places look much tidier and better if there's all more green in there. And implementing this along with treating water is just better overall. However, it's starting to get better now with people getting an understanding of it. There needs to be a push to make people more aware of it more than anything when it comes to it. You'd be surprised how many architects still, to be fair, they're probably pushed by the developers, but when you go back to them and they're like, well, we need to think about this.
Yeah.
They don't know about it,
Absolutely, and I agree with that. Thank you both for excellent presentation and for answering the questions. And thank you everyone for attending. Before we wrap up, I'll pass you on to Ling, my colleague. So we have actually one more poll question to do just before we wrap up. And then we will have exit survey for you guys to please let us know what you like to do in the future. So the last poll question is, do you use software for drainage design? Yes, I use Causeway Flow. Yes, I use another software. No, I design drainage without software. Okay, couple of seconds. I still see answers are coming up. Yep, I think that is the final one. Let me close that and share with you significant number, about 50% roughly uses Causeway Flow, and the remaining definitely are not using or using another software. So that's good to learn. So I'll pass you on to my colleague Ling. Can you please do the exit survey for us, if you don't mind, and thank you very much and have a lovely day. Link. I think my colleague is probably not around, so I'll just close the session. Thank you. Now I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm just trying to hide the results so that everyone can see my screen. I don't know. Can people see my screen? Oh,
yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So that was really useful. Thank you, Mark, Seanette, for your time. I think we've sort of covered all our bases, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you found this session useful, and we really appreciate your time. Like Nat mentioned, there will be a short exit survey, so any feedback we will really appreciate it. And again, you will receive a recording of this webinar in the next 24 hours, so just keep your eyes on your inbox. And finally, if you have any additional questions or just want more information about Causeway's drainage design solutions, please do contact us at marketing@causeway.com. And once more, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.